Hello everyone and welcome to our Gem Pursuit. My name is Matthew Weldon and I'm joined in our magical and mysterious pursuit to the world of antique and vintage jewellery by my trusty co-host Alyce Ketcher. Hello Alyce.
Hello everybody.
This week we're diving into a French brand that is one of the most high-profile names associated with fine jewellery in history. Alyce, would you like to reveal who we're talking about today?
Of course, it's Cartier.
But not only that, we are joined by a very special guest who is a Cartier specialist and author and has just released his recent book, In the Beginning Was the Line, Cartier Art Deco Drawings, 1910 to 1930. Joining us from Paris, Olivier Bachet. Olivier, bienvenue sur Gem Pursuit autrefois. J'espère que tout va bien avec vous.
Tout va très bien, merci Matthew. Everything is fine. I'm very glad to be with you this morning.
And I just say, Olivier, we have the book here in front of us and myself and Alyce barely separated from the book for the last couple of weeks getting ready for today. It's a beautiful object in its own right. Tell us a little bit about this recent book you've brought out.
Well, this book, as you saw, is about Cartier, my passion, and also about the drawings of jewelry made by Cartier or for Cartier in between 1910 and 1930. Why I decided to write this book? Because I had access to large private collections of drawings, including mine, actually. And I wanted to share these never published documents. Because when you buy a book on Cartier, one of the drawbacks of the publications are that it's always the same documents, the same archives, the same pieces of jewelry, because everything is coming from the Cartier collection. So I can understand that. But the production is so massive, so diverse, so large, that I think it was interesting to show something else to the public.
I have to say, Olivier, one thing that really struck me was I have been reading a lot of jewellery books in my time, and specifically those on Cartier. And I think this is probably the most, I'd say, groundbreaking book for Cartier design that I've seen since the Nadelhofer book, or the Nadelhof book on Cartier, where he is kind of like the jewellery historian for Cartier. Because everything that I've seen since that book until now has been, like you said, the same kind of book, but just written in a different way, but with the same pictures, with the same stories, with the same histories. This particular book helped us to understand, I think, number one, the workshops behind the creations. It answered a lot of questions that I had as well about where the design team were actually located and how they worked with the workshops, which I don't think has ever been discussed before either in any of the books, and how the kind of like council of the directors like Louis Cartier and Pierre Cartier, how that they kind of gave their stamp of approval and how these designs kind of came to fruition. Like, this is a book that is for those who are really trying to understand Cartier in terms of, you know, one thing that you mentioned in the book is that Cartier never did really Art Nouveau designs.
No,
right?
Never. Except for some struts, frames, and some medals, especially religious medals. There is no Art Nouveau at Cartier. Louis Cartier didn't like the Art Nouveau. He considered that Art Nouveau was an art made for the bourgeoisie, and it was not the kind of clients he wanted to attract. So plus, I think it was also a question of taste. He didn't like Art Nouveau at all. That's it. So that's why there's no Art Nouveau pieces in the Cartier production.
Yeah, and this is a really important thing for those who are just trying to learn about Cartier, because I'm sure you've seen in your time as well, many pieces have been signed Cartier, but they're not. These kind of little clues and things like that are written within the pages of your book actually help those who are wanting to learn more about this particular house, this firm, to understand, well, if you see an Art Nouveau piece that is signed Cartier, there's a high possibility, if it's not a religious medal or a frame, that it is not a part of their original collections.
Yes, as you know, my main activity is to be a vintage jewelry expert and a Cartier expert. So if I can help people to understand when it's fake or when it's dubious, so I'm glad. I mean, it's part of my job as the director of IHA expertise, as you know.
Yes, and we were just talking about the busy schedule just before we came online, Olivier. You know, it has you moving around in different places. But speaking of places, what I thought in the book, you know, you talk about Paris being, you know, the navel of creativity in the early 1900s. Do you think this is still the case, or has it changed, or what do you think about Paris today?
Well, you know the famous word from Henry Miller, Paris is the navel of the world. It was definitely the case in 1900. If you wanted to start an artistic career, you had to go to Paris. Just think about Picasso, for instance. It was like Italy in the 17th century. Is it still the case nowadays? I don't think so, to be honest with you. Why? Because nowadays the world is a very small world, fast, connected. And so basically you don't need to go to Paris to smell Paris. Well, it's not really true, but it's definitely not what it used to be in 1900, for sure.
That's so sad. But we are losing. We have lost a lot of those handcrafted arts. Again, referring back to your old book as well, your last book, I loved how it talked a lot about the different workshops that were around Paris, how many workshops there used to be. And it's just not the case anymore of, you know, people who specialized specifically in one niche subject is the reason why you were able to create such beautiful things.
Yes, indeed. In my introduction, in the forewords of the book, I'm explaining, for instance, that nowadays, if you go in the new areas of Paris, let's say if you remove all the streets names or some specific elements of the city, the bench or, you know, stuff like, or the buses or stuff like this, it's impossible if you just look at the architecture. It's impossible to tell that if you are in Paris or in Shanghai or in Berlin, you know, there is no specific architecture for Paris nowadays, let's say. You know, you know all the buildings we have in our boulevard. You know, this is very typical of Paris. You have the same in London, in Amsterdam. And so when in 1900, you were part of this atmosphere, the architecture, the people. Now you have McDonald's, you have Starbucks, you have everything which is totally international, which is not from Paris. You know, it's like a big thing that you can find all over the world, not only in one specific place, like it used to be in 1900.
I actually discussed that part of your book specifically with Matthew when I started reading it, and me and the rest of our colleagues were all discussing it about Dublin as well. We were saying it's so true that we're losing the soul of our cities, and we're losing our individuality, and we're turning into corporate juggernauts, as you said, where our high streets are turning into the same high street that you see in every single major city in the world.
Yeah, close your eyes and open it on a very contemporary building, which might be absolutely beautiful. It's not a critic. I love contemporary architecture. It's not the point at all. But close your eyes, open it on a modern building, and just tell me where you are. It's impossible. It's impossible.
It is impossible.
Anywhere in the world. And it was definitely not the case in 1900.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing with people seeing, the Art Deco jewellery that was coming out of Cartier. It was distinctly, they might never have seen pieces like this before, so it was distinctive probably to there. But, speaking of the time that you had during COVID to kind of instigate this beautiful book, it kind of reminded me of, in chapter 1, you spoke about the Great War, and it was a bit of a break for Cartier. Do you think this creative process helped the company in its new designs?
Well, definitely, but it's not unique to Cartier, because the World War One, as you know, marked a turning point. So what I'm going to say is not new, and it's obvious to everyone. But because of the war, the entire society changed, and especially the place of women in society, which is definitely related to jewelry and to the jewelry production. So yes, World War One is a breaking point, and after that, the women evolved towards greater independence. The famous flappers. The women got rid of their corsets. They were able to smoke in public. And by the way, that's why Cartier, because we are talking about Cartier jewelry, but that's why Cartier also produced a lot of cigarette cases, a lot of vanity cases, a lot of objects, precious objects for women. But one of the specificity of Cartier is that actually Art Deco began before the war.
This is one thing that I find super interesting, because I love that you've written it in the title. So it says, at the front of your book, it says, in the beginning was the line, and then underneath it says Cartier, and then Art Deco Drawings 1910 to 1930. Now, most people in the jewelry industry would say that Art Deco is between kind of 1920 and finishes in 1940-ish. But Cartier is ahead of the curve, it seems, and almost, I would say, one of the creators of the style.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I understand that 1910 is a bit early to speak about Art Deco. I understand that. But, you have to take some dates when to put on the title. To be very accurate, I would say that Art Deco, the first Art Deco, began with Cartier around 1909, with the arrival in the company of Charles Jaco.
This is one of my favorite parts of your book, actually, where you speak of Charles Jaco. And I know the story has been told before, and I've heard it before, but the way that you've positioned it within the book does assist with how everything kind of ties together. But for the listeners, could you explain who Charles Jaco is and how he actually came to be a part of the Cartier firm?
Yeah, of course. So Charles Jaco, it's interesting. He was a young man. I think he's born in 1885. And in the family of Charles Jaco, there were butchers from father to son. So nothing to do with jewelry design.
But hard workers.
Yes, indeed. But so he was coming from a poor family. But he was lucky enough to have an uncle who was a doctor, and his uncle paid for his studies. So he studied art in the École des Arts Décoratifs in Paris. And he began his career designing balconies, and he actually was working for a bronze smith. And one day he was installing a balcony on the facade of a Parisian building on a boulevard. And Louis Cartier was passing by, and he saw that young man working on a balcony. And he organized a meeting with him. Well, you will read everything in my book. Actually, this story is also coming from Francesca Cartier Brickell in her book The Cartier, because she met the family. So it's really interesting. But you will find it in my book also. Anyway, and so Louis Cartier organized a meeting with Charles Jaco, with this young man, and he hired him as simply as that. At that time, it was not like nowadays. It was rather quick, I guess. And so, but he was not an expert in jewelry design. He had no experience whatsoever in that field. So he had no. How do you say in English? No a priori, no preconception. How do you say in English?
Yes. No, perfect. Preconception is exactly right.
Preconception. Yes, indeed. And so that's it. And so what he liked, Charles Jaco, mainly was colors. And you have to understand that before 1909, Cartier jewelry was only white. What I mean by white, it was made only in platinum and diamonds. Okay? And so when Charles Jaco arrived in the company, he decided to use colors, to put colors in the jewelry. And that's really a turning point in the Cartier production at that time. That's the first point. The second point, Charles Jaco was passionate about exotic civilizations. Islamic civilization, Chinese civilization. And so what he wanted to do was slightly change the shape of the jewels to give more an oriental taste to the jewelry production, and also to put color on the jewels. And basically, oriental style with colors is the definition of Art Deco at Cartier. So, you see, it began around 1909, to be very accurate, with the arrival of Charles Jaco in the company. Actually, if I can add something, we are talking a lot about Charles Jaco, but it was only possible to make this kind of jewelry because of Louis Cartier, because Louis Cartier was really the boss of the company, and everything would have been impossible without the "okay, go ahead" of Louis Cartier.
I was just about to ask that, Olivier, because I was thinking if it was something today, even in our business, if someone new came in and wanted to change what has been successful for the business, Charles Jaco must have faced some resistance, I'd imagine. But if he had the support of the boss, then he could, of course, done it. But was there any indications that he faced resistance to this change?
Apparently, no, because apparently with the first drawings he did, he wrote later in his notebook that everyone was enthusiastic about the new drawings. So apparently there was no resistance. But one more time, it's very important to understand that the boss of the company was Louis Cartier. Louis Cartier was a kind of genius, and he immediately understood that here was the future of the company, in a way.
I think as well, like the reading through the book, you understand a little bit more about the business side of the brothers as well, because they are not only visionaries for jewelry, but they're also very shrewd businessmen. And I think that if you think about the previous years with the garland style and how revolutionary that was with their use of platinum and the amount of tiaras that they had created. I think they knew that they needed to make a change in order for them to stay ahead of the game. And so I think that's probably one of the reasons why as well that Louis Cartier was kind of scouting around Paris to try and find something that would be a bit of a gamble, you know, because taking on someone like Charles Jaco would have been a bit of a gamble, but also, like you said, wasn't muddied by already being in the industry, which can always put you in a box and not allow you to kind of be like more creative with your designs.
Yes, you're absolutely right. That's why we should not forget that the Cartier brothers were really great businessmen. It's not only nowadays we are mostly thinking about the artistic part of the production, but the three Cartier brothers and their father, Alfred Cartier, were really genius businessmen, great businessmen. If you think about in between the opening of the famous address 13 Rue de la Paix in 1900 and the top of the Cartier production, there is only 20 years of time, which is very short. If you think about it, it's very short. And Cartier became in 20 years of time the most famous jewelry brand in the world. So it's a very quick story, actually.
And in a world without the internet and, you know, scaling a business would not have been as easy as it is today in a lot of ways, which just makes it more impressive.
Absolutely.
Also, when you talk of, one of my favorite things in the book is you talk a lot about the actual archives or as if you've already seen all of Charles Jaco's notebooks, and kind of you talk about the designer's library, and, you know, it kind of really builds a picture of what kind of like was surrounding the designers and what they were doing, like what methods they were kind of using. When you talk about the design library, this is the one thing that I'm really interested in. Do you know what books or what sources they actually had in their design library?
Yes, because a detailed list of the books of Charles Jaco library has been kept in his personal archive. So I put an extensive list in my book. Basically, the library of Charles Jaco and also of Louis Cartier is made of books regarding architecture, decoration, costumes, exotic civilization, but also Versailles, Chinese art, books about mosques in Samarkand, in Persia, in India, all kind of books. Also, and it's rather interesting, also books, very old books. I found a brooch, which is illustrated in my book. So that brooch, the design of the brooch is coming from an illustration of a book printed in Paris in 1499.
Wow.
So you see, it's rather large, the inspiration. It's not only, as we usually think, it's not only China, Persia, and India who inspired the Cartier at that time.
This is because I was reading through also, you know, that there was certain footnotes where you said, you know, this could have possibly been a pattern that's also on a Romanian, that's seen on a Romanian textile and things like that. And I was like reading through that and I was just thinking, you know, a lot of people look at Cartier jewels and they think, oh, you know, there's no way that you could look at one and think, oh, it's not beautiful. There is definitely an alluring aspect to something that has been so meticulously designed and then assembled in a way that is just unimaginable to the person who's looking at it if they're not a jeweler. And the thing is that, yeah, it's beautiful and it's coveted by millions of people all over the world. But it's also the thought process behind it that people don't actually understand, which has made it come to life. And it's really, your book does such an amazing job in actually showing the brainstorming of these designers to come to an end product. So it's such a beautiful way for people to understand how important the jewelry piece is. It's not just the end product, but it's the process that they went through to actually find a design that's so unique, so beautiful, and of course has now become timeless.
Yeah, when you go in the archives and when you look at the notebooks of Charles Jaco, there are really notebooks of ideas in which the designer makes sketches and takes notes of everything that comes in his mind after, I don't know, looking or reading a book, after visiting a museum. It's really, really interesting because you can find very, very different things and things which apparently have nothing to do with jewelry. Nothing.
I think that reminds me, of even Charles Jaco with no previous conceptions of jewelry. And I always think that even in we've hired one or two people before who don't have a jewelry background and they come in with such fresh ideas, which is great. Obviously, sometimes they come in and they just don't understand it, but that's a different thing. But look, I thought there was a definite tie between like museum exhibits and the jewelry design inspiration, as you outlined in the book. Do you think that still continues today, or is there different sources of inspiration?
Well, I don't know. I don't think so, to be honest with you, but I'm not very familiar with the contemporary production and the way it's working. But during the 1920s, it was definitely the case. And you have some notes from Jaco, from Louis Cartier. To give you an example, when Louis Cartier went to Russia, I think it was in 1911, he took with him Charles Jaco, and he wrote in his notebook, I have to take the designer at the Hermitage Museum because there's plenty of things to look at. It will give a lot of ideas to the designers. I have a very specific example of a cigarette case produced in 1913, in Paris. And the lid of this cigarette case represents a Greek antique scene. And I know that this scene is the reproduction of a scene which was painted on a Greek vase kept in the Cabinet des Médailles at the National Library in Paris. So what happened? Charles Jaco went to the National Library. He saw that vase. He drew the vase quickly, and after, the scene was reproduced on the lid of this cigarette case. So we have the proof that the inspiration was coming from museum, from exhibition. Nowadays, I don't know. I can't tell, to be honest with you. Maybe, I hope so in a way, but I don't know. But it's probably not as it was. Probably not, I would say.
I think it's like the inventiveness, even that skill that he had to actually see something, draw it quickly in a way that he could later, apply it somewhere else. It is a question. Is that inventiveness still around in jewelry? I mean, obviously there's mass production jewelry, which is, commercially focused, right? It's made for certain markets, but yeah, is the inventiveness still there for the high end and rare pieces?
I hope so, but I'm more focused on vintage, and so I'm talking like an old man now. When you look at the past, it was always better in the past. Well, I know it's not the case, but my knowledge in matters of contemporary jewelry, especially at Cartier, is not good enough to
compare.
To tell you, to compare indeed. But I think if you look at the contemporary, the pieces I know are still very, very creative, I think.
Well, Olivier, I don't think it's. I don't think you're sounding like an old man. I think every generation says that. But one statistic I remember you said to us we had a previous chat with you before in Paris, and I remember you said that in the 1930s, and correct me if I get these numbers wrong, but in the 1930s, there was something like over 3,000 workshops in Paris. Whereas today, I think there's only 300 or thereabouts.
No, less than that.
Less than that.
You know what's the big difference in between? If you want to understand jewelry in the 1920s, you have to understand something which is super important. The big difference in between nowadays and this time, 100 years ago, is sophistication. It was, at that time, impossible in a high society to go at the theater without wearing a tiara. It was impossible
to bring
drink.
That back. I want that back.
It was impossible in a fancy restaurant to drink a Burgundy wine in a Bordeaux glass. It was just impossible. To give you another example, I like this example. If you go in the most chic place to buy a pair of gloves, like you have the best and most expensive pair of gloves ever, to close your glove, you're going to have a little a button. That's it. Okay, even if it's a mother of pearl button, still it's going to be a button. Cartier was producing in the 30s clips for gloves in platinum, diamond, and enamel to close your gloves. It's the women, they had to wear a certain type of brooch with certain material during the day, but at night it was different colors. You could not wear, let's say, black and white jewelry in the afternoon. In the opposite, you could not wear pieces with coral during the night. So it's sophistication of the time was something that you cannot imagine nowadays. That's why you had to produce a lot of jewelry, because when you were a wealthy woman, you had to have a certain type of jewelry for the day, a certain type of jewelry for the evening. You had to have a brooch for your hat, a brooch for your belt. Plenty of things. And so, of course, you had to have the people to produce the jewelry. That's why you had so many workshops in Paris.
You're literally making me cry, Olivier. That is so upsetting to hear. I'm sure all of our listeners are the same. Like, what did we do wrong to get to this point in the world where we don't have diamond clips for our gloves? This is horrendous. We're living like peasants.
I could imagine getting a nice pair of gloves from Hermes or something, and then going into Cartier and getting your clips.
I mean, I think it's why, when you look at old Hollywood movies as well from this time period, you do see exactly what you're talking about, Olivier. You do see the women wearing, jabot pins, and you do see brooches always on the dress, and the brooch always does change from night to day. And Casablanca is a great one as well, the movie where you watch and you see the jewelry that's being worn.
Absolutely.
And it's just, oh my gosh, we really did lose something over time. But one thing that you do say is that there's a specific style that the Cartier firm has, and It's called à la Cartier, and that as expressed by Louis Cartier. What could you describe what that means, or in your experience, you'd look at a piece and you're like, that is à la Cartier?
I would say that's the root of the success of Cartier. And that's why Cartier was considered as the best jewelry house in the world, because Cartier was producing jewelry with its own taste. The idea behind was, let's make jewelry that will be recognizable everywhere in the world with our style. You know, Cartier was not, most of the jewelry companies were buying the design and the drawings in the workshops. The big difference with Cartier had his own design studio. That's the big difference. That's the main difference between Cartier and the others. It means that the pieces of jewelry were designed inside the walls of Cartier, not outside the walls of Cartier. So they were able to create, to invent their own style.
And in contrast, the other jewelers, they would buy the designs from outside of the company and then they'd make them internally.
No. It was not made internally. It was a piece of jewelry was mainly, in general, I'm talking in general. Of course, you have some specific brand, but in general, let's say a boss of a company was going in the next door workshop, and there was a catalog of the production of the workshop, and the boss of the company asked the guy, the director of the workshop, I would like 2 exemplaries of brooch number 2, 3 of brooch number 4, and 1 of brooch number 10. Okay? So you were buying the jewelry on a catalog in a way. So you were also buying the drawing. You were buying the drawing and then the piece of jewelry as well. With Cartier, it was totally different. Cartier, there was a group of 8 designers. I'm talking about around 1910. A group of 8 designers into the wall of the company, and they were only focusing on making jewelry in a certain style, which was the Cartier style. So it was not bought outside, it was inside. And that makes the difference, because they were only focusing on making pieces in the Cartier style.
And just for those who are listening, could you explain, like, from the design process to the sales process, how that worked? So first off, we'd go to the designer and the designer would design something. The design is ready. And then where would it go from there?
Well, this is the last, you're talking about the last chapter of my book, from the design to the production. Well, it's, I'm not gonna go into details. You will have to buy my book.
Absolutely. I agree.
And we will give the details for that. Don't worry, before we finish.
Yes.
No, but basically it all starts with a pencil, paper, and an eraser. So, but a design was, designs were made by the designer. Drawings were made by the designers. And once in a week, the drawings were presented to a kind of council. I think it was every Wednesday in Paris. In this council, there was Louis Cartier, the boss, René Prieur, the head of sales, and René Révillon, who was Louis Cartier's son-in-law. There was also Georges Bezeau. Georges Bezeau, he was responsible for deciding whether an aesthetically pleasing piece of jewelry was technically feasible. So, and this council, decided, okay, we're going to produce that, not that. Oh, yes, let's make that. And after that, so Louis Cartier, for instance, said, okay, let's do that brooch. At the bottom of the drawing, it puts his initials, LC, for instance, and the drawing was sent to a workshop. And the workshops Cartier was working with in the 20s, they were so good, and they knew how to work with Cartier. So just most of the time, just a simple design, a simple drawing was enough for them to produce the piece of jewelry. Most of the time, there was no in-between phase, if I may say. Just the drawing, from the drawing to the production of the piece.
The last thing that I want to say, Olivier, that I really, really appreciate about your wonderful new book, because I don't want to give too much away. Everybody really needs, this is a really important book for those who are trying to understand Cartier in a different light, because it really does bring to the forefront a lot of things to help you understand the creative processes, the business acumen, and also the wonderful drawings and things that actually we haven't seen. So, you know, pieces that were created and disassembled and things like that. It has extraordinary pictures of, and included in that the original designs, which is fabulous. But one thing that I really appreciated as well is you talk about color combinations. So yes, the color combination section within the book, where it talks about specific Art Deco color combinations and then shows you pieces of jewelry. I think this is like the most extensive color combination list I've seen, but also with examples of pictures. So I just want to say I'm really appreciative that you put that in there. And it's really something for those who are going to be purchasing the book. It's really something to look forward to, because it has such an amazing array of color combinations that are so unique to Cartier. And then people start to copy it later on. So it's the perfect kind of way to understand the Art Deco period and this injection of color that you have been talking about in the beginning.
Yes, but you noticed most of the time it's the same. It's what I mean is Cartier used to put most of the time the same colors, a green and black, red and black, but it was impossible at that time to find, I don't know, a crazy color combination. It was it was really studied, if I can say. You know, it was really something very specific to the jewelry of the period. It was impossible to put at that time. Well, impossible. Nothing is impossible, but a color combination which will be famous in the 50s, purple and turquoise, was impossible in the 20s. Well, almost impossible in the 20s. We shouldn't say impossible, but almost.
Yes.
You know, so it was the color. Charles Jaco is using the word harmony. So these harmonies were made. Certain harmonies were made on purpose. It was not like, oh, let's take a little bit of blue and let's take a little bit of red, and so I'm going to put some red, some green here. No, it's more elaborated than that.
So if somebody had a piece of jewelry that they thought included one of these color combinations, and they thought perhaps that it was a Cartier piece, but they didn't know for sure, how would they get in contact with you, Olivier?
Well, the best is to go on the website of the IAJA expertise, which is IAJA-expertise.com. And you can contact me, or you can contact the group of experts. There on the website, there is a link to my email address. And of course, you have all the explanation of the process of the expertise.
And I think, Olivier, we get a lot of listeners to the podcast from, the US, Canada, Europe. This is an internationally available service you provide.
Well, you know what? I've been a jewelry dealer for 25 years.
You must have started as a very young man, Olivier.
To not exaggerate, Matthew. I'm older than you think. Anyway, and what I wanted to say is that I saw in my career a lot of fakes. And it's not nice to buy a fake piece of jewelry, a fake Cartier. So I think we are providing an important service for the people in order to let people know that what they bought is a genuine Cartier piece or a genuine Tiffany piece. I think it's important.
It's so important, Olivier. And just for those who are listening as well, Olivier helps also dealers who've been in the trade for many, many decades to also authenticate their pieces. This is a very difficult task to do. And Olivier is the expert on being able to give that stamp of authentication to these pieces. So if you do have a piece and you have that question in your mind, this is who experts in the trade actually go to as well to get their pieces authenticated. So do have a look at the website if you have a piece that you would like to authenticate.
And we will, of course, put links to the website and where you can get this beautiful book in the show notes section of this podcast.
Before you go, Olivier, the question that I have for you is, are you working on another book? Or is there any books in the future that I
have a major problem in my life. I have only one head and two hands. And I have so many projects of books, of things, that, I should have two lives. But yes, to make it short, yes, I have a new project, a new book will be written soon.
Wonderful. We can't wait. And for those who haven't already gone into the show notes and clicked on the link to get the book, please do so. It really is one to add to the Jewellery Connoisseur's collection of books.
Olivier Bachet, Director of IAJA Expertise and author, thank you very, very much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time and being so generous with your knowledge and expertise.
Thank you very much.
Don't forget, we have notes on Olivier's work and everything we spoke about today with links and anything else you might need in the description area of this podcast. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit that follow button. My thanks, of course, to my trusty co-host, Alyce Ketcher. Alyce, thank you.
Merci, Matthew.
And of course, to our podcast producer, dustpod.io. We will be back very soon with another magical and mysterious pursuit to the world of antique and vintage jewellery. And until the next time, for me, your host, Matthew Weldon, chat to you then.